The USAID has been exposed as a bloated mess of corruption. And that is just one head of this Hydra. How many more are out there in our government? We discuss this and so much more on Trad Takes. Welcome to episode 6 of Trad Takes. As always, we are hosted by the Traditionalists, and I'm Eric Kosovich. Thank you for joining me this week. Please like this video. More importantly even, comment in this video. Subscribe to the Traditionalists, and make sure to ring that bell. We'll start off today like we do every week by reading my favorite comment on last week's video. Last week's comes from Colleen Schropfer, 2943. Colleen says, "Still laughing, Eric. I can hardly wait for Father Geckel to be our president. Also, thank you for bringing to light the Face the Nation interview with J.D. Vance. It was worth a view. No need to apologize about your first thoughts on the vice president. We have been oppressed so long with snakes, it has been difficult to trust anyone in the political arena. Thanks for the briefing on current events. In his heart, Colleen." Thanks, Colleen. I agree with you that we do find ourselves in a foreign place today. Usually we're talking about the lesser of two evils, and rightly assuming the worst about politics and politicians. The last few months have really been a breath of fresh air. It's kind of like splashing water on your face, waking from a fever dream. To find sanity, common sense, and in some cases actual godliness return to politics after so long almost doesn't seem like it's real. And we get so used to being in that funk, it can be difficult to take wins because we've basically been programmed to accept losses. But we do have to make that mental switch to allow ourselves to be hopeful and optimistic. Otherwise we turn into cranks and black pillars, which is not only bad for society, it's bad for us. But with all that said, we have to take everything in moderation. The other side of that optimism coin is being the type of people who get swept up into being quote-unquote joiners. You know, the people who are fully supportive and defensive of everything that the current administration is doing. We have to be careful of going too far that way also. Like, yes, the discovery of the corruption and the dismantling of USAID. Yes, it's amazing and therapeutic. But that doesn't mean that we have to agree with proposals like the US is going to take over the Gaza Strip. Just because politicians like Ron DeSantis and J.D. Vance are great and everything that we should hope for in politicians, that doesn't mean we need to accept everyone in the Trump cabinet and his group. There's a lot of sycophants and other type of people who are inevitably along for that MAGA ride. Just as an example, everyone knows how much I dislike and distrust RFK Jr. Just because, he happens to be pro-baby murder, a climate dictator, and overall authoritarian. I don't trust him and like him just because he's on Trump's team, any more than I like and trust J.D. Vance because he's on Trump's team. As with all things, moderation is needed. Clear eyes are needed, and all people and occurrences should be judged not with whirlwind feelings, whether positive or negative, or by a rush of online populistic swooning. These things should be judged by a cold, logical grasp of truth and reality, of course filtered through the ever-clear and ever-present teachings of the Catholic Church. No one on this channel, or on all of Earth, has the ability to do this perfectly, and I'm certainly in that bucket myself. But all things considered, if I'm going to be wrong on someone like J.D. Vance, I'd much prefer to be skeptical at first, and then come around, than to be wrong as a swooning fanboy for someone who turns out to be terrible. But that's just my opinion. That's the conservative traditionalist in me, I guess. Thanks again for the comment, Colleen. Sorry for the rant it set me on. And everyone listening, leave a comment now. Set me off in a random direction for episode 7, or even ask me a specific question or give me a specific topic. If it's good enough, I can even make it a whole show. Alright, I want to spend a lot of time today on the USAID scandal that has been rocking the political world this week. But before I do, I wanted to spend a little time discussing the Trump speech that he gave at the prayer breakfast. In general, again going with that balanced approach, there was good and bad. The good was that Trump came off as very pro-God and pro-religion, which obviously good things. The bad is that it was very ecumenist. Not a surprise there. I think Trump's view of God very much aligns with the Founding Fathers. It has a deist tilt, where God exists and is all-powerful. It is funny how Trump always refers to him as Almighty God, which for some reason is very heartwarming to me. But the deist tilt is that, yes, he's the creator and powerful, but he's distant. He is the creator, but he has basically left his creation behind to sort of take care of themselves. That's what many of the Founding Fathers believed. And then, of course, the ecumenism along the lines of everyone here believes and worships God in their own way, and that's wonderful just so long as they believe. Those aren't his exact words, but those implications come through in the speech. So yeah, obviously, it's good and refreshing to hear a president speak about God. It's refreshing to hear a president speak about faith and the role of religion in the United States. But it obviously falls far, far short of the type of speech that I think a good Catholic president would have. So anyway, the speech, like most Trump speeches, was a little bit all over the place, but I'll try to hit the high points here. He started off by saying we need to bring religion back, which is good. He spent some time talking about an executive order he signed to create a new national park full of statues of great Americans, called the National Garden of American Heroes. I think that's a cool idea. I'm not 100% sure how it relates to a speech on religion and how the United States needs to bring religion back, but that's something I would go visit. Some other lines from Trump. He said, "None of us knows when his time will be over. I confronted this myself in Pennsylvania." He said it changed something in me. I believed in God before, but I feel much more strongly about it now. I thought that was interesting. He does seem to be different from the man he was prior to being shot in Butler, Pennsylvania. Rambling speeches notwithstanding. And then he went on to make some interesting points about compromise. So he said, some people want an open border. Some people want a closed border. Some people want men and women's sports, and some don't. So where's the middle ground? It's hard to have a middle ground. There's two ways. You can either do it or you can't. I think he's hitting on something super interesting here, and something that the Republican Party and maybe conservatives in general should think more strongly about. In politics, we're always going to have compromises. Sometimes you have to take a middle ground even when one side is right and one side is wrong. We see this, for example, in the pro-life movement currently. Yes, the Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade, but now we're dealing with, these heartbeat bills and everything in the states. Most true pro-lifers would argue, well, if life begins at conception, all abortion should be banned. But if you were to put that on the ballot, of course, it would just get shot down instantly. And so instead, what the pro-life people have had to do is, put a 6-week heartbeat ban. Is the heartbeat detectable? Then it's banned. 12 weeks, 15 weeks, whatever it is. It's all better than unlimited abortion up to birth or even after. But it's still a compromise. So anyway, what Trump is saying here is some of these issues, such as open border, closed border, or allowing men to be in women's sports, these are issues that you really can't find a middle ground on. You can't compromise in them. So, a very clear-headed thought that in some ways is almost defending everything he's been doing on the executive order front. He went on, "I really believe you can't be happy without religion. Let's bring God back into our lives." Again, obviously right. Spot on. But what does religion mean? Religion is meaningless unless it's the true religion, the correct religion established by Almighty God. Maybe someday we'll have a president who understands that. All right, on to the number one topic of this week and today, USAID. Some of you may already know all about this, and some of you probably likely know more about it than I do. But for those who haven't, I'll give the short version. The USAID stands for the United States Agency for International Development. It was created on September 4th, 1961, when Congress passed the Foreign Assistance Act. Its purpose was to administer economic aid to foreign nations, and it was intended to counter Soviet influence during the Cold War. The thinking being, of course, if we can socially and economically develop other nations, then those nations would be on our side in the Cold War. They wouldn't want to join the Soviet bloc. Its core pillars were to be disaster relief, poverty relief, global issues such as the environment, and socio-economic development. And that may have been what it started as, and those who founded it may have had good intentions. But if that's how it started, it's no longer that. The current scandal, if you want to call it that, has arisen in the past week. Elon Musk's DOGE, or Department of Government Efficiency, has been auditing the USAID and uncovered what can only really be described as an agency whose sole current purpose is laundering money to the political class. Conservative estimates are that about 80% of the roughly $50 billion annual budget for USAID is fraud. Some estimates go as high as 93%. The most shocking and, for me, entertaining parts of this story are the list of programs that USAID has been sponsoring. And even more funny is the dollar amounts attached to those. Father Geckel went through a list of some of these on his Friday podcast, but I'm going to read some that he didn't get to. $2.3 million for artisanal and small-scale gold mining in the Amazon. $3.9 million for LGBT causes in the Western Balkans. $5.5 million for LGBT activism in Uganda. $6 million for advancing LGBT issues in priority countries around the world. $6.3 million for men who have sex with men in South Africa. $8.3 million for USAID education, equity, and inclusion. One of the largest ones is $400 million for a digital tech project for LGBT people in Africa. Let's take a second here to think about the ridiculousness of the numbers involved here. Yes, the causes are ridiculous, but the numbers can kind of become numb to us. We talk millions, billions, trillions of dollars, and it just seems like funny money that we don't understand. So let's just take one example. One of the funnier examples is that the U.S. spent $20 million on making an Iraq Sesame Street. $20 million. So the average taxpayer's annual tax bill is somewhere around $20,000 per year. So instead of saying we spent $20 million on Sesame Street in Iraq, you should say we spent the entire tax bill of 1,000 Americans to promote Sesame Street in Iraq. Are you one of those 1,000 Americans? That should fire you up even more when you hear $20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq. Instead think, well, this is 1,000 people's entire taxes going to that, instead of national defense, instead of paving the roads. The things I just listed were all in the single-digit millions. Oh, okay, that's only hundreds of people's tax bills. Ridiculous. But let's take this a step further. Let's set the ridiculousness of these topics and the amount of dollars aside for a moment. Let's say you're a bleeding heart progressive who thinks that some or all of these programs are necessary. Let's say you're even silly enough to think that these programs should cost what we're spending on them, at the expense of disaster relief in our own country. Okay, are you there? You're in that mind space? Me neither, but let's pretend. The worst part is it turns out that most of these programs are not even receiving the funds prescribed for them. Between the years of 2011 and 2020, USAID funded, from U.S. taxpayers, over $12 billion to Syria, intended to provide food and medical supplies. A significant portion of that funding, estimates are at over $100 million, ended up in the hands of a terrorist organization known for committing atrocities, such as suicide bombings and mass civilian executions. You can bet they weren't using the money for food and the destitute. Closer to home, a former executive of a digital consulting firm in Delaware admitted to submitting fake claims to USAID and receiving government contracts for work that was never performed. In another case, the International Rescue Committee, or IRC, paid $6.9 million to settle allegations under the False Claims Act related to USAID funding in the civil war in Syria. The money this IRC received was intended for humanitarian assistance, of course. But it's been revealed that the staff of the IRC were participating in a kickback scheme with a Turkish supply ring involving fake contract bidding. The information goes on and on. And now I, again returning to the balance theme of this podcast, warn you and others that there is likely a lot of hyperbole, and there's no doubt some intentional deception on our side of this. The more ridiculous a claim or the more out there a take is, the more clicks people get. So I'm certainly not saying that 100% of the stuff you're finding out there on the internet about USAID is 100% verified and is 100% legit. There likely are some wings and some departments in USAID that are performing good work as intended by the creation of this department. But even taking that with a grain of salt, even taking all this information with a grain of salt, the fact that it's still somewhere in the high 80s percentage of this funding that is actually going to fraud and ridiculous causes that we don't need, that's still really unbelievable. But as a small government person, does this surprise me? Not really. Organizations, when left unchecked, tend to grow and grow into big swollen blobs that only faintly resemble how they began. They completely lose whatever sense of purpose they might have had. Now their purpose is just to grow and consume all in their path. At some level, I see this firsthand because I work for a large corporation. And something that is as bad as the USAID has become, in my opinion, is beyond saving. I 100% think there's a place for the U.S. to provide foreign aid. We're a rich country, and there are poor, starving countries and people that could use our help. Foreign aid is a tool, My problem is not with the tool, it's how the tool is used. So I'm certainly not a proponent of cutting off all foreign aid. I think foreign aid still needs to happen in the right places. But I don't think you can save the USAID based on what I've seen. Continuing to keep a $50 billion organization around to maybe get $5 billion, if we're lucky, of actual aid to the poor, that's not an acceptable way to do that. At some level, that's like booking an airline flight to get the free soda you get served. And then the final point, the Hydra point. This is one organization. Who listening right now really thinks that the USAID is the only place in government where waste and abuse occurs? Who really thinks that the DOE, the Department of Education, to pull a random example, uses even half of its budget for actual, useful, educational things? Multiply that by the vast number of multi-billion-dollar government departments out there, and you start to understand. What Doge has uncovered with USAID is the tiniest tip of the largest iceberg. It's just one head of this governmental hydra. Sure, we can cut it off, but there's many more to take its place. We have to keep this momentum going, and maybe after several years of tireless work, we'll finally be able to kick back and consider ourselves successful in meaningfully shrinking the size of government and reversing this trend of bloated, swollen organizations that have been growing and growing for decades. This really excites me. I love this Doge venture and everything about it. One thing I don't love, and I just want to touch on it briefly, Father Gecko also mentioned this, was Trump's proposal to have the U.S. take over and rebuild the Gaza Strip. I think that's probably the worst idea Trump has ever had. Now, I've sung Trump's praises for how he handled Colombia. I've been sort of on the fence about the Canada and Mexico tariffs. I'm not quite as pro-tariff as some are. But I'm going to be fair here and rip him a new one for proposing that the U.S. take over the Gaza Strip. This is a foreign policy idea that's potentially even worse than what we had when Bush and Cheney decided to invade Iraq. I can only hope that this was Trump saying something ridiculous in order to give himself more leverage, or maybe even just to make himself look more unhinged for potential peace talks. But I can say I don't envy any of his people who have to pretend that this is a good or even an acceptable idea. The talking point that most of them have been using is, well, we've tried all sorts of things in the Middle East and we never get peace, so, well, here's at least a different idea. But I think most people, most Americans, with any sense of the history in that region, understand that there will never be peace in the Middle East. Societies and countries, the way they operate is based upon the morals and the religious foundations of their people. And so long as Islam is the major religious affiliation in the Middle East, you are not going to have what we would consider in the Western world peace. Islam is by its nature and by its theology a violent religion. You can have peaceful Muslims, but that really just means that they have not followed or suspended certain aspects of their faith. So, yes, dumb idea, terrible idea, the worst idea, everyone says so. And I think the best we can hope for is this is just Trump being Trump, and he's just saying crazy things as a negotiating tactic for future use. All right, I am going to end the show a little bit differently today. I wanted to make a tribute to my great-grandfather, who I never met. My great-uncle told me the story of his being in the pew for Mass with his dad, my great-grandfather. When Mass was completed, this was in the early 1960 or 1961, prior to the changes, the congregation began singing Holy God. My great-grandfather leaned over and told my great-uncle, "This is the anthem of the Catholic Church. Sing it like you mean it." When the hymn was complete, my great-grandfather held out his hand and looked up to the roof of the church as if he were checking for rain. Then he leaned over to my great-uncle and said, "I don't see any dust coming off the rafters. I guess we didn't sing loud enough." Anyway, I heard that story and I loved that story about my great-grandfather. He died in 1962, so I obviously never came close to meeting him. In some ways, I'm glad he passed away before all the changes in Vatican II. I like to think and hope that he wouldn't have gone along with them, but obviously most people did, so it's one of those Schrodinger's cat situations. In his honor, I wanted to play a recording of the men's choir that I'm in. We sang Holy God this past week when we were practicing. This is obviously a low-quality phone recording. It was recorded during practice. It wasn't official, so it's not great. But I would argue that it's probably better to listen to than to listen to me talking, so there we go. That sound means we're all out of time for today. Please like, share, and subscribe to The Traditionalists, and don't forget to ring that bell. And spread the word whether for my show Trad Takes or for any of the other shows hosted by The Traditionalists. Remember to leave a comment. It might well be the one I pick to read and react to next week. This is Eric signing off. God bless you all, and God bless these United States of America.